Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today, we're talking about the trust equation, a powerful framework for understanding how trust works in professional relationships. And we're talking about this because it's something that comes up constantly for our clients, whether they've just started a new role, taken over a team, or they might even be working with a new boss. And the question is always the same. How do I build trust quickly? And we know that trust is so fundamental to your effectiveness as a leader, and creating it consistently isn't always straightforward. And we know that lots of leaders struggle with this. So we wanted to dedicate a whole episode to it. So as usual, we're going to break down all of the components and we're going to look at the common pitfalls of the trust equation. And we're going to share some practical strategies that you can use straight away to strengthen your leadership credibility. So let's do what we always do and get straight into it. So Jackie, talk us through the trust equation.
Yeah, I love this. And literally yesterday I was having a conversation with somebody and I was like, have you come across this framework? So it just felt like this was definitely long overdue as an episode. So the trust equation is basically a practical model or framework that looks at how does trust work in the context of professional relationships. So if you Google it, you'll find images, but essentially what it says is trust is a function of, so if you imagine a sum and it's a fraction, so on the top half, you've got credibility plus reliability plus intimacy. And then as a denominator, you've got self-orientation. So credibility is essentially, do you know your stuff? So it's your expertise and your experience. So can I believe in you knowing what you're on about? Then you've got reliability, and that is the belief that you will follow through. Do I believe that you will be consistent and that my experience of you is going to be the same from one day to the next, from 1 hour to the next sometimes? And then intimacy, which sounds slightly dodgy sometimes when I'm describing this model, but really isn't, is more of that psychological safety element. It's, can people be safe and vulnerable with you? Do they feel that there's a connection and that kind of emotional relationship where they can truly be themselves and that's okay? And then your self-orientation, which is a bit that can undermine all of the others, is whose interests are you driven by? Are you focused on yourself or others? So the first three factors can build trust, but then if it's perceived that you only do all of those things that are in your own interests, then that can undermine everything. So I feel like that's really hard to describe without the graphic, but hopefully that talks about some of those levers and the elements that form part of that equation.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you talk through it as a framework like that, because you just think, I need to build trust. What do I do? Just get in there, get to know people, get under the skin of what's going on, and hopefully that trust will come. But it doesn't always. So I think when you've got this framework, you can actually speed up that process. So if we look at breaking down all of those components and maybe start with the credibility component, you said that this is about establishing that you know what you're talking about. So building trust through being that credible person. But there are some nuances that can be really easy to miss, and people can get this bit wrong, can't they?
Yeah. And I think what often happens, so when I describe this to clients, what we're often talking about is these are the different levers, the different ways that you can build trust. So with credibility, do you know what you're talking about? People often interpret that as being their technical expertise. And we've done an episode way back when now on how to manage people who are more expert than you. And I think when you're working with people who know a lot technically, you can sometimes feel like, will I have that credibility if I don't have that technical knowledge? But you're not necessarily there to be the technical expert or the subject matter expert. You're there to be the leadership expert. So you don't have to know all of the technical stuff, but you do need to understand enough to ask good questions, to evaluate information, to coach your team, and to display all of those leadership behaviors. So I think it's important that people recognize that does not mean you have to be a subject expert in all of the roles that each member of your team undertakes.
Yeah, it's a good point, that actually, because lots of people will manage a whole range of people within their teams, and there's that real tendency that you have to learn all of those roles, that you have to understand those roles inside out in order to manage that team effectively. And in all honesty, I don't believe that is true. I think to manage a team, to have an effective team, you need to have the right people on board with the right skill set. But it's how you balance that, isn't it? Because obviously, to support them, you do need to have a little bit of an understanding of what they do, but you don't need to understand their role inside out. And I think sometimes people can go wrong by trying to make out that they know how it all works, and it doesn't work well sometimes, does it?
As you were saying that, I had in my mind a conversation again, recent client conversation from someone whose function is very specialized, and through a restructure they're now reporting to a different boss. And what they said was, he doesn't know the ins and outs of this function and what I do, but he's very honest about that. And so that honesty about what he did and didn't know, there's that element of, I can't look to him for technical support and technical mentoring, but I can still get what I need from him as a boss, because there is that recognition of not trying to overstate or make himself credible by seeming like he knows what he's talking about. So yeah, absolutely, it goes the opposite way if you pretend to know things that you actually don't, because you will be found out.
Yeah, and that's the hard thing, isn't it? Because then I always feel like that's where the imposter syndrome creeps in, because then you're trying to be this person that you're not. You're trying to be this leader that knows everything, understands everything. And you get to a point and you think, oh, it's actually too late now to say, I don't really understand the ins and outs of that. So you just have to roll with it. And then the imposter syndrome can kick in quite heavily with that. So I think if you're looking at building trust from day one within a new role, within a new relationship, then if you can be as honest and transparent as you can, that is really going to help build that trust. So looking at the next component, reliability is probably the most straightforward element of trust, but it's also one of the most commonly broken ones, isn't it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was listening to something. So Pam and I both listened to Alex and Layla Hormozy, and there was something that Layla was talking about on this, which I think illustrates it brilliantly, of if you were with someone who was an amazing partner for 363 days of the year, but then 2 days of the year, they disappeared, went on a bender, cheated on you, were atrocious, then it wouldn't matter that 363 days of the year, everything was brilliant. The point is that it's that lowest common denominator. And I think that really illustrates this reliability component of trust, that it's about how consistent you are with achieving what you've actually promised, with staying true to what people can expect to be delivered by you, with your communication, because you can be brilliant at all of those things 90% of the time, but people will judge you on the 10% of the time that you fail. And a classic example of this is people moving one-to-ones, which if you've listened to my rants on this topic on the podcast before, you will know for me that's an absolute no-no. It's not that they can never, ever be moved, but they should be important. They should be committed to, they should be in the diary. And so if your team feel like any meeting with them can be dropped for something else. Doesn't matter if everything else you do is really reliable. How they feel in that moment that you've let them down is going to really lessen that reliability element of the trust equation.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it from that perspective, it's a huge part of it, isn't it? You think you're being consistent, but you just have 1 or 2 days where you drop off and you just lose that trust so easily with people. So, looking at the intimacy component, that is also an important part of the trust equation. And this isn't about inappropriate closeness in the workplace, just in case anybody's just started listening at that point and wondering what we're talking about. But it is about creating the psychological safety, which we've talked about lots on the podcast. So, what do you think is the most important part of that?
So I think there's probably 3 elements that people really need to consider with this. So one is, can you read the room and respond appropriately to other people's feelings? So can you anticipate how people feel? Can you manage your own emotional responses? And can you ensure that other people are able to be themselves around you? And then there's also being appropriately vulnerable. And again, another client, we had a conversation, and this element of wanting to be supportive of others, but actually finding it really hard to share stuff about themselves. And when we explored and dug into that, and she started to do a little bit more of that, she gained such a huge amount in return. And I think this shows why, because already she had that emotional intelligence, she was supportive of others, they did feel able to open up to her, but they probably didn't feel as if they knew her as well. They probably didn't feel as if she was as willing to be open about her own mistakes or challenges or learning or things inside or outside of work, whatever those conversations might be. So I think that kind of appropriate level of vulnerability is really key. And then finally, and again, it's a really simple one and perhaps maybe overlaps with reliability element, but it's that confidentiality of, are you the kind of person who gets involved in gossip or conversations or any of that? Do you respect sensitive information? Do you make sure that you are keeping confidential what needs to be confidential? Because if any of those things are not there, then that sense of people being safe around and safe to be themselves is going to be impacted.
Yeah, and I think that links in quite nicely with the final one, which is the self-orientation factor, isn't it? Because that's the denominator in the equation, and it can actually undermine all of the trust building efforts that you've made. So just talk us through that final part of it.
So, yeah, this is absolutely the things that you do that create a perception of, are you self-serving or are you serving the relationship, other people, the needs of the business? If you're perceived as everything you do is all about what fits in with what you want, what you're trying to achieve, what you want from your career, then it doesn't matter if you tick the boxes of all the right behaviors. If it's perceived in that way, then people are still not going to have solid trust. So some of the stuff with this is having that hidden agenda, getting involved in conversations because you've got one eye on this thing and wanting to gather information so that you can pursue that agenda for yourself. It's therefore linked to listening and that ability to give good quality listening time and space to other people. So are you prepared to really listen, or are you waiting for them to stop talking so that you can share your great ideas? And it's also that kind of credit and blame piece. So as a leader, you want to be taking that accountability and sharing credit. And it's so easy for that to flip the other way. So I think probably that credit and blame one is less something that I see with a lot of the people that I work with, because actually it's almost the other way around. They feel a little bit awkward about taking too much credit, so they probably don't do enough. But I think the blame piece sometimes can still be, if you're frustrated, if you're annoyed, if you've delegated something to somebody and they've not delivered. I know, hand on heart, in the past, I've done that where I've thrown them under the bus in a way. by saying that. And actually, when I reflect on the situation in a less emotive way, no, I didn't brief them, or I didn't stay close enough to how they were approaching it. It was on me. That thing wasn't delivered. So I think it's probably more of that blame element that sometimes in frustration or just being reactive rather than responding, is easy not to take full accountability. And that really undermines, because for those individuals, obviously that's going to impact the trust that they feel in that relationship. But also for other people that are hearing that, the perception that creates is that you're not taking accountability, and therefore I'm prepared to distance myself from when things go badly.
Yeah, and it's funny because as you're talking through all of that, I'm thinking through all of the leaders and managers that I've ever worked for. And one of the things that really stands out for me, and I suppose in some ways, like when I think back, I'm probably still a little bit traumatized about it, but I had to do a presentation. It was part of a leadership course that I was on back in the early days of being a leader. And my manager at the time, he was a senior leader, too, more senior than me, obviously. And we were given a presentation brief. He actually gave me the wrong brief, and we spent a couple of weeks backwards and forwards on it. We created this amazing presentation. I practiced it. I knew it off by heart, didn't even need the cue cards, got in there, delivered it. He was sat there on the panel, and all of their faces were just completely blank. And I was thinking, what's going on? I've practiced this. I'm trying to engage this audience. Like, what's going on? Anyway, got to the end, finished, asked them if they got any questions. There was just like this deathly silence. And I was thinking, what have I done wrong? Did they not like it? What's happening? And one of them said, where did you get the brief from? And so I said, from my manager. That's where everyone got the brief from. And they were like, that isn't the right brief. That's not the right presentation. That's not what we wanted. And he sat there and said, you didn't get that from me. And I was like, oh. So at that point in time, I was like, I definitely did get it from you. And I thought, like, at this moment in time, I feel really embarrassed. He obviously feels embarrassed. He's just thrown me under the bus, and he's just said, he didn't give it to me when he clearly did, and I've got the email to prove it. So I just thought, okay, so I just said, okay, thanks for your time. Let me know if you need me to redo it, packed up the stuff and left. And from that point onwards, the trust had completely gone with him. And he came out and spoke to me afterwards, and he just said, I don't know what happened there. And I just thought, okay, that's how it's going to work. Let's just move forward. And we did. And I never, ever trusted him again. And I was constantly second guessing myself. And as soon as I got the opportunity to move out of his team, I did, because I just felt like all of the trust had gone. And it was just one simple thing. He could have just said, I'm so sorry, I've given her the wrong brief. But to save face for himself, he threw me under the bus, and it was awful.
If you think about the trust equation that we've just described, so credibility, his credibility in your eyes dropped off a cliff because he'd given you the wrong brief and worked with you on the wrong brief throughout that period and let you deliver the wrong brief. The reliability in terms of his behaviours and being willing to commit to being consistent in how he operated dropped off a cliff. The psychological safety and that kind of intimacy and connection in terms of your working relationship disappeared. And he appeared self-serving in order to save face. He denied responsibility in a public forum. So he's basically, in that one example, we could see every single element of that trust equation. So it's not surprising that trust was broken. But I think what's really interesting is we all make mistakes. None of us is perfect. And trust can be rebuilt. Using this framework, you can consider, where are the levers? What can I do to impact on the trust in the relationships that I want to build? But it's got to be the right approach. You've got to acknowledge and take responsibility rather than be defensive or try and save face. You've got to understand the impact. If he'd have said to you afterwards, I'm so sorry, I should have said that I'd given it to you, I panicked and I said it in the moment, I will go back and tell them. And I understand that must have been absolutely mortifying for you. It was a great presentation. It just wasn't the brief. Then that would have been a very different scenario. Not to say that it wouldn't have been an impactful situation for you, but your reaction to it probably would have been very different had he have immediately acknowledged that, taken responsibility, and understood what it had caused for you and acknowledged that openly. And then he could have rebuilt that. He could have changed his behavior. He could have gone back and told them, no, I know I said that in the moment. I thought I had to give them the right brief. I hadn't. Even if he'd saved face a little bit and gone, I've looked back and actually I did give the wrong brief. And it takes time, but trust can be rebuilt. But it sounds like he did none of those things. So it's not surprising that trust was gone.
Yeah, he didn't make any effort whatsoever and continued to try and cover his tracks. And for me, it was just the trust was lost, the relationship that we've built. And at that point in time, up until that point in time, I thought he was a great leader. I'd learned so much from him. And I suppose in some ways, again, that was another huge lesson for me on how not to treat people and how the trust can be damaged so easily. And from a rebuilding that trust perspective, he never did anything to try and rebuild that trust. In fact, he kept trying to deflect it, which made it worse. But as you say, trust can be rebuilt, and it definitely can. And I've seen that in other situations before. But in terms of quick wins that people can take away if they're in similar situations or if they're looking to build or rebuild trust, what are some of the quick wins that people can take away from this episode?
So I think it's really with this, it's about taking that framework and dissecting it. So I think, first of all, rate yourself honestly on each component of that trust equation. Think about this in the context of specific relationships where you'd like to build trust. So ask yourself that question of, where am I at now in terms of my credibility? What does this person believe about me? Where I am with my reliability? Where am I in terms of that trust of psychological safety within our relationship? And what are some of the things I could do to impact that? So I think start with picking apart the framework into the component elements and just ask yourself, if there's a relationship where I want to build trust, what can I do to build each of those top or to appear less self-serving on the bottom? And then the other one that I'm going to share is really simple, but it's actually really high impact. And that is just to practice listening in future conversations, because it is so common that we are primed to give advice, to come up with answers, to troubleshoot. The pace of the world of work drives a lot of that. So I think listening can feel quite alien at times. And when we actively practice listening more and understanding that person's perspective, that can feel quite strange. So I think to just really focus on, when you're in a conversation with somebody where you want to build trust, really listening without interruption, ask further questions. So rather than go, yeah, I agree with that, and what about this, and move the conversation on, ask people questions, show interest in what they're talking about, encourage them to open up more. And I think that will really help to shift how that relationship feels. So those would be the two I would say.
Amazing. And I think that they're brilliant ideas to just get moving with it and start to think about how you can build trust with your team or your stakeholders. And if you've been listening to the episode and you're thinking, I wouldn't mind a little bit of support with that, we can help you on a one-to-one basis. We can deliver team workshops. So get in touch and find out more about our coaching options, and we'll be able to share all of the different ways that you can work with us. And as usual, thank you for listening, and do make sure that you share it with anybody that you think might find it useful. And don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platforms. And we'll be back next week with another episode.
Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles, and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.